Hey, it's Dawn Michelle. Welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to talk about my favorite pairings of 2025. I love this time of year because everybody starts talking about all the decks that they worked with, the things that they love, the decks that made the biggest impression, those top 10 decks of the year. I want to talk about my favorite pairings because I very rarely use tarot separate from oracle, although I will have another video for you all talking about my favorite new decks of the year, or new to me. But in this particular video, I just want to share with you the 8 pairings that really made a big impact on me this year. They were some of my favorites. Some of them I've returned to again and again. Some of them I used for very specific reasons. So I thought we'd start off with this little pairing, which is the Peculiar Pathways Tarot and the Spiritual Message of Birds. The Peculiar Pathways Tarot is an indie deck. It's absolutely stunning. It's one of my favorites. I really love working with it. I love the collage work. I think it's beautifully done. And I was using this deck along with the Spiritual Meaning of Birds, which is just this lovely little deck. It's just I was going to say a cheap little mass market. It was an inexpensive, that's really what I mean, an inexpensive little mass market deck. And it's such a great one to throw with this. Now, I was using this little combo here. I'll just flip through it as we're chatting. I was using it as a way to connect with the work that I was doing with the Bird by Bird book. I did a whole video on that. I'll leave that linked for you below in case you missed it and want to check it out. One of the things that I was using this for was to kind of dive deeper into my own writing and my own creative process. And I really found that the birds paired with the Peculiar Pathways worked really well for that particular work, really working with that book, really tying into the information that I was getting from it, and then using the tarot and the oracle to really sort of flesh out those ideas, dive deeper, see what they meant to me on a personal level. But one of the things that I also discovered about this little pairing is that using this bird energy, this idea of things being kind of like flighty and taking off and maybe coming back around, it's a really interesting sort of energy to pull into my readings, because I feel like all of my readings with the Peculiar Pathways and the Spiritual Meaning of Birds really spoke to creative work, but also creative work that could be very temporary. So it's kind of like just in this moment. This is what's going on right now. We have Owl with focus, prophecy, and wisdom between the Queen of Wands and the Three of Cups. And I would look at that and see, how does that relate to what I'm doing right this 5 minutes? In the here and now, how does that message relate right to this moment? Versus if I were to pull different cards an hour from now, then I feel like those would tie in to that moment. Hopefully that makes some sense. This was one of those pairings that I felt like I could do these little check-in readings multiple times throughout a day. So it wasn't just throw a big reading down and then really dive deep into it. That's a great way to work with tarot, of course. But one of the things that I really enjoyed about this one, and one of the ways that I worked with it, which was a little bit different than how I normally work with my tarot cards, is that as I was working through creative projects and as I was working in different creative spaces, whether that was creating video content or editing or writing, I could use these 2 decks, throw them down on the table, and get a message that was really honed into what was going on right that moment. So it wasn't like a message for the whole day, and it wasn't something that I carried with me. It was just in this moment, what do I need to know as I'm working on this particular thing? And this little pairing was absolutely fantastic for it. Something about it being birds, something about the way that these 2 decks converse together, it just really allowed me to get into those messages for just the moment. Like, what do I need to know to get me through this next little hump of whatever creative work that I'm doing, or get me over a creative block, or help me answer a creative question that I have. And in an hour, I could come and do something different with it. I could throw down more cards, get another message, and I didn't feel like I was getting those repeating messages. You know how sometimes if you do a reading over and over and over again, or you use your cards multiple times throughout a day, it just kind of starts giving you the same message over and over again, because you're not really like sitting with it. You're not really moving past it, not working with it. At least that's my experience a lot of the time when I'm working with tarot multiple times throughout a day. I start getting the same message over and over again. Even if I'm using different decks, even if I'm like in completely different spaces, I just keep getting those same energies showing up. And I noticed with this one, that wasn't happening. It was like these messages, this particular pairing was meant to be temporary. It was meant to be in this moment. Here's the thing you need to know. And then in 5 minutes from now, 5 hours from now, you can come and I'll give you a totally different message that relates to what's going on right then and there. And so I really love that. And it worked really well for a lot of my creative work, especially because I tend to bounce around a lot. So these were great for just what do I need to know this 5 minutes. Really, really enjoyed it. All right, so let's talk about what is probably my most used pairing for the entire year. This is the Cursed Auguries Tarot. This is an indie deck. It is currently out of print. Occasionally it comes back in. You keep an eye out for it. I will let you know that there is a little bit of a trigger warning here. There are some things in this deck where there is hands through nails, spiders, snakes, things of that nature. I've not pulled out any of the cards, so please feel free to skip ahead if those types of things bother you. But I absolutely adore this deck. It is my favorite pip deck. My number one favorite pip deck. I mean, it comes pretty close to the Antique Anatomy. Love that one too, but this one just has a special place in my heart. I love the way it reads, love working with it. And I've been pairing it with the Lost Oracle. This is a mass market Oracle deck. It has just some gorgeous imagery. I really love the keywords and the key phrases on this deck. They work so well with my readings. And something about pairing these two decks together, probably my most used pair. I really love the way that they converse with each other. I feel like I get this real anchored message through the Lost Oracle. And oftentimes, funny enough, being that it's the Lost Oracle, this is the deck that I come to sometimes when I really don't know what the deal is. I don't know what is up. And I just need a little bit of direction. And this one just works so well. And then pairing it with a pip deck allows me to really open up my readings and my work and dive deep into what they mean to me on a personal level. As I've talked about before with other pip decks, I don't feel like I get too locked into one particular tradition with a pip deck. I feel like I can read it in my own way, which again is very numerological, elemental, which was how I was taught to read cards in the first place. And a deck like this just really helps me to reconnect with that. And I really enjoy working with these together. So here, for example, we have Under Siege and we have Uproot Your Habits between the Page of Wands and Strength. Love that. Love those together. I also worked with these with a lot of different decks, and this is one of those pairings that feels very open, that I can throw more cards, additional oracles. I've used some playing card divination mixed in here. I've mixed in some other oracle decks with it to layer up my readings or to kind of expand them out further. I just think these two together are absolute perfection. Again, probably my most used pairing, the ones that kind of keep consistently coming back to my desk again and again. Whenever I feel like I'm just like a little bit lost or don't really know what is going on, what I'm feeling, what I need, I tend to pull this pair out and just kind of see what my anchor point is here with my Lost Oracle. And then I'll pull some of the pip cards, some of the Cursed Auguries around it to kind of flesh out that message, maybe pull in some other decks, some dice casting, things of that nature to really dive into those messages to see where this is showing up for me in my life. This is such a great one for when I'm just unsure about things, whether that's unsure about how I'm feeling in the moment or what I need to do in a situation, or I'm just like feeling a little bit lost right this 5 minutes. It's such a great one for kind of getting me back on track, for giving me something to work with, giving me something to dive into to see what I need to know right now. How do I kind of find my way through this path? And I really enjoy working with these together in that way. And apparently I felt quite lost this year, so I've actually pulled this pairing out many, many times. I've also used it in my Enchanted Library practice, and it was great for that. And it's just been a really, really fun one, staple of my collection for sure. So now let's talk about what might be my favorite new Oracle of the year. I mean, I've got a whole nother video on favorite decks, but this is also a really fantastic pairing, so I wanted to include it here as well. This is the Black Salt Oracle. I absolutely adore everything about this deck, and it works with so much of my collection. It was absolutely a hit this year. I did pair it quite a bit with the Lumina Tarot. This is the new mass market edition. The Black Salt Oracle is an indie oracle. As always, I'll leave links below for everything. These two together, I really love both of these decks. Granted, the Black Salt, like, I could throw this at anything, and I really love that about it. I really appreciate that about the deck. It works with the majority of my collection, which is fantastic. There's something about these two decks together that I really enjoyed for kind of tapping into workspace. So trying to not just creative work, but just kind of the everyday mundane of trying to get work done, trying to get things accomplished, trying to figure out what do I need in the moment. Okay, we have the Mask with the Tower and the Eight of Swords. The messages that I got with these two decks together were just really clear, really spot on about how do I move forward from this place that I'm currently at. Because most of the time when I was coming to these two decks for general readings, I really came at it from that perspective of here's where I am. How do I move forward from here? And whatever it is that I need at the moment, whatever I'm questioning, whatever it is that I'm trying to accomplish, how do I move forward from this particular place? And a lot of times I did use it just in this 3-card configuration here with the Oracle in the center. With that is my focus point, and that's the anchor for my reading. And then I'd look to the cards around it to see what I need to know in order to move forward. I often did a lot of 4-card readings as well, where I would add a tarot card here for sort of the conscious, subconscious, superconscious, the what do I know, what's hidden underneath, what do I need to rise above to. That was another one of my favorite type of readings to do this year. I think I shared quite a few of them in my monthly wrap-ups and how I worked with individual decks that way. This is just such a great pairing for helping me to get really clear about what I need to do moving forward. So like, what's my next step? So here we have spider web. So this would be like what the reading is, what I'm anchored into right now, how I'm feeling, and then what I need to do in order to move past that. We've got the Chariot here in the Hierophant. Beautiful cards to really look at, you know, how can I move forward in a way that is very meaningful? And these two together, I think they're just very aesthetically pleasing as well. And like y'all know, I love a good aesthetic. It is part of my practice. It is part of how I create. It's part of how I express myself. Aesthetic for me isn't just about the pretty. There's always meaning to it. Where I place things, colors, shapes, textures, all of those things. One of my favorite cards in the deck. Love that one. All of those things matter. And so a deck like this, where everything feels very artistic, very intentional, they work really well together to tap into that other layer that comes with the aesthetic, the just beyond the, oh, it's so pretty, but there's meaning in the texture, in the lines, in the colors, in the white space, in the black space. And I think it's really, really beautiful the way that these two come together and the way that they converse. So another pairing that just had absolutely stunning conversations with each other and aesthetically are just chef's kiss is the 5-cent tarot with the Mother Mort Carnival, I think is the name of this deck. This is quite a sparse little oracle deck, and it doesn't have a ton of cards, but I really love the cards that are in here. The one thing I will say about this particular one is that I do have to get into the guidebook, and for that I'm okay, because how I tended to use this was not so much as a focus or an anchor point, but more as an archetype, so who the reading is coming from. And then I used the 5-cent tarot to really dive into the message that that particular goer, not a carnival goer, carnival person was sharing with me. So here we have the dream cadaver. Again, I would have to get into the guidebook in order to determine what the dream cadaver exactly was and how that energy will show up as an archetype, as a guide for my reading. But then looking to the 5-cent tarot with the Ace of Cups and the Judgment. And this is one of those rare cases where it's a deck that has a bunch of keywords on it, and it really, really works for this deck. And I really enjoyed using those keywords and pulling them into my readings. I think it worked really well in this situation because I wasn't actually using this as a keyword deck. So I was using this as the archetypal energy, the person who this reading is coming from. So this time the reading's coming from Carl the chemist, and Carl wants to talk to me about the Two of Cups and the Knight of Needles. Now, oftentimes I pull other decks into this as well, but I could really tie into those keywords that were on the cards themselves, because I often didn't have a bunch of extra oracle cards or extra keywords that we're pulling into the reading. Occasionally I would pull a few other oracles in to kind of distill down deeper and deeper and deeper into certain ideas. But for the most part, these worked really well just the way they were. I love doing them as these little 3-card reading where I just have the archetype in the middle. Here's the crone Mort, and what does she want to tell me? She wants to talk to me about the tower and the 4 buttons. The other thing that was really fun to do with this is talk to me about the tower with that upheaval and the, can't read upside down, the resisting change. And then I would pull additional cards for each of those. So I could look at sort of the light and shadow, because I don't actually read reversals as in read them with a reversed meaning. How I tend to read reversals, or when reversed keywords are on a card like we have here, then I read that as a blockage. So what is the thing that's stopping me from accessing that, or what is the challenge or the roadblock to that situation? And this worked really well for that, because I could create these readings where I have Mother Mort, we had Crone Mort, now I have Mother Mort, and I could look at the strength card and those two, using those 2 different keywords of self-mastery and weakness, and I could pull additional cards to dive into those deeper. And then looking over here at the lovers, where we have commitment and discord, and again diving into those deeper. This really allowed me to create some really wonderful, robust readings. I really also liked pulling the cursed auguries into this, because again, these have a lot going on. So using a pip deck to dive deeper into each of those keywords was a great practice, a way for me to kind of get these bigger, fuller, fleshed out messages. And I love having an archetype as sort of the, who's this reading coming from? I kind of approach it in the way that I sort of approach like deity readings, as in this is the person that is talking to me through these cards, or this is the energy that I'm channeling through these cards, depending on how you see those types of things. It allows me to kind of sink into their story, their voice, their archetype, and kind of look at it from that perspective, which gives it a little bit of a perspective than looking at it from my own lens all the time. I mean, it is always still coming from my own lens, but this allows me to kind of step outside of that a little bit and think about, you know, what would the King of Crows have to say, and how would his lens be a little bit different than mine in providing these messages. And I just think it's a great way to work with the cards, and I really, really enjoyed working with them in this way. So speaking of working with archetypal energies, let's talk about a couple of my favorite pairings from the year, but also happen to tie into deity work. Now, this particular combo I pretty much used exclusively for deity work. This is the Call of the Morrigan Oracle, and it showed up for me in a time when I wasn't really expecting to work with Morrigan as a deity. I got this just as a oracle deck, just to use as any other oracle, because I thought the artwork was really beautiful. It turns out that was more of a calling to work with the Morrigan, sent me down the rabbit hole of getting to know her and working with her as a deity and as an energy. And I ended up pairing it with the Endless Tarot. Now, this is my prototype edition, and funny kind of story with this whole deck combo thing, like it's just the Morrigans. I do have 2 copies of this. The Morrigan has claimed my prototype. She does also have her own dice set, which I did not pull out, but this Endless Tarot is specifically just hers. I only use it for readings with her. I do have my final edition, which I use for me and for other readings. It does tend to happen often where my deities and deities that I work with, they do have a tendency to kind of claim decks, which is really interesting. The next 2 deck pairings that I'm going to show you both are deity pairings, and those deities have claimed those decks as their own. The Call of the Morrigan, though, is an absolutely gorgeous oracle deck. I do often have to get into the guidebook with this one, which means for deity work, when I'm doing that deep spiritual kind of going into more layering with my readings rather than just throwing down a few cards and going, hey, what do I need to know today? This is more of an expression of working with deity, of working with the story and the energy. So I do have to get into the guidebook with this one, but because the work is different, because the intention is different, I don't mind putting that effort into it, even though I am a broken record to say that I really get irritated when I have to rely on a guidebook for an oracle. There are a few exceptions, and this is one of them, particularly when I'm working with specific energies such as deity. Then I actually do want the whole story. I want to go in deeper. I want to know what the cycles represent and how that relates to the Morrigan. And then what I do is I look to the Endless Tarot to again flesh out that message, like I've talked about in many of these pairings, where it is, what message does the Morrigan have to say to me about fate? And so about fate, she wants to talk to me about the Star and the 7 of Pentacles. And again, I will often pull in more decks with this. As I mentioned, I do have a particular dice set, so I do a lot of dice casting with the Morrigan. She really likes dice. just tends to be a thing that we do a lot together. And I really love working with these. I feel like I really get deep into her energy. I feel like her messages come through in a really strong way. I love that the Endless Tarot has kind of like this fantasy vibe to it. I spend a lot of time working in fantasy and working with fantasy as personal growth. And so having that energy pulled through my tarot into my deity work is really amazing. It fits really well for how I operate in my spiritual space. And a lot of times I will also use colors. So one of the things about the Endless Tarot that I really love is it kind of has this blue-black overtone to it, but then there are certain pops of color that I can tie in. So maybe like this red cloak with this red shield and this yellow hat cloak, I think, with the sun, and those I tend to pull in and see those are things that are calling to me right this very moment. Love this card. Portal Stargate cards, my favorite in the deck. Okay, that and the Lovers. Absolutely love the Lovers card in this deck. But again, working with these two as a pairing to commune and to work with the idea of connecting to Morrigan's energy and her story and what her archetypal message has for me in the moment. That's definitely how I worked with these two. And these two were very much an exclusive pair. I only worked with them together, and I only worked with them in my work with the Morrigan. So another deck pairing that I used pretty exclusively for deity work is the Tarot of Persephone's Garden. This is the second edition, which it has a name, I can't remember it, but it does dive a little bit more into her Queen of the Underworld energy, which is more how I personally work with Persephone rather than her kind of spring maiden archetypal energy. I do have the first edition. I definitely prefer this one as the one I've been working with, and I've been pairing it with the Flower Oracle. This is one of those Broccoli magazine decks. Love these decks. I think they work really well with this particular pairing. And how I go into this one is really interesting because we do have kind of that spring energy coming through, that sort of honoring Persephone as the spring maiden. And we get that through the botanical deck, which I really love. It's got the great 3 keywords on it. So here we have tulip with wealth, power, and cheer, between the 6 of Cups and the Queen of Coins. Great cards for that. I tend to use this as this is what message that Persephone is wanting to share with me. You know, she wants to talk to me about cherry blossoms with evanescence, joy, and beauty. And then I would use my tarot cards, the Tarot Persephone's Garden, to dive into each of those 3 keywords. It's one of my favorite ways to work with this particular deck pairing together. Again, similar to like I talked about with the Morrigan, this is how I commune with Persephone, how I tap into her energy, what she wants me to know. And oftentimes I paired these decks or some combination thereof with the other deity decks that I have that I'm going to share with you here in a moment, which are my Hades decks. I did a lot of work with Hades and Persephone as both a couple and as individual deities, sometimes tapping into Persephone's energy, sometimes tapping into Hades, and oftentimes working with the two of them together. I really love the way these two decks work together. I love the way they converse. I feel like the flowers really help anchor into that. She did come from that maiden energy. That's where her story starts. And we kind of get that reminder, that anchor into that here with the Flower Oracle. But the cards themselves really allow me to sink more into that Queen of the Underworld type of energy, which is her, the archetype I prefer to work with her. I think it's a great one for tapping into that to see where I'm at within that journey and making those connections in my own spiritual practice and my own personal growth. And it's just such a beautiful little combo for that. So here we have Hibiscus with health, zest, and resistance between the 4 of Cups and the High Priestess. Love that. So then, as I mentioned, this is my Hades pairing. Again, Persephone also has her own set of dice, same as Morrigan. Hades has his own set of dice, and I often joke that they are the most pokey, uncomfortable dice to work with, but so fitting for his energy. And for my work with Hades, I use the Darkness of Light. This deck has pretty much become my exclusive Hades deck. I only work with it when I'm doing work with him and his energy. The Dante's Inferno Oracle is one that I often use with Hades energy, but I do occasionally pull it into other things. Sometimes I'll pull it into my work with the Diablo, the Notoria, the Goetia. It works really great for that as well. So while this particular oracle, much like the Flower Oracle, isn't necessarily a deity specific oracle, the tarot very much is, and I only use it for my work with these particular deities. The Tarot Persephone's Garden is strictly a Persephone deck, and the Darkness of Light is strictly my Hades deck. And it works really well for both of them. I feel like their energy after this whole year of working with these decks together, of really getting to know these deity and their energy, I really feel like the decks have kind of imbued themselves with that energy. And it feels like they are able to sort of commune with me or communicate to me through these decks. Again, still filtering it through my own, inner self, because that's where it's coming from in my perspective. But I love this idea of having their own decks. This is my kind of conduit. And as soon as I pull these decks out, I feel that connection to them. Now, the Dante's Inferno Oracle is an interesting one because I've thought about rehoming it many times, but it does work particularly well for these types of readings. I almost always have to get into the guidebook. And again, as I talked about with the Morrigan deck, if I'm working in sacred space, in deity space, in my spiritual work, I don't mind putting in the extra effort to get into the guidebook to see what that deeper story is. Again, similar to the Morrigan deck, this particular oracle does have kind of stories because it does tie into Dante's Inferno. And so you can dive a little bit deeper into those stories, into those energies, and pull them into your reading. But the keywords on the cards themselves don't necessarily do a whole lot for me, so I am pretty reliant on that guidebook. Not always my favorite for just a everyday working oracle, but it works really well in deity work because I am okay with taking that extra time to really diving in deeper, because I'm not just throwing down a few cards just to see what I need to know. I'm actually trying to tap into a certain kind of energy for a certain kind of reason. So I want to spend that time in that space, getting the most out of the reading and the messages that I possibly can. So a deck like this actually works pretty well for that because it does make me slow down and it makes me take that time to really dive into the stories and what's going on and what messages are coming through. So let's wrap up with my probably most favorite fun deck pairing of the year. And that is the Alice in Wonderland Oracle. This is the Paulo Barbieri version. I sincerely hope there's going to be a tarot in this because I love absolutely everything about this deck and the art and the whole steampunk Alice vibe. So my jam. Paired that with my beloved steampunk tarot. This poor deck, I've had this deck for decades. It is so bowed, it is so worn, and I just absolutely love it. It's one of my favorites. I think it was the second or third deck I ever bought. Definitely the first deck I ever connected with on a personal level. Absolutely love it. Staple in my collection. And I really enjoyed these two together. They were so much fun. I used them a bit in some writing work that I was doing because I was working in sort of the steampunk world, working in a steampunk story. And so I pulled these in for some readings and some work with that. But it's also just a pairing that I would throw out on my table anytime I just really wanted to dive into this energy. Anytime I just wanted to bring a little bit of fun and chaos into my day. This was such a great pairing for it. I love the artwork in really both of these decks, but the Barbieri Alice in Wonderland, again, sincerely hope there's going to be a tarot. There absolutely needs to be a tarot in this whole world. I love it. And I had so much fun playing with it because this is one of those pairings that I would pull out when sometimes things just got to be a little bit hard or a little bit overwhelming. And I just need a break. I just need to take a few minutes, have a little fun, have a little play, give my cards a shuffle, pull out one of these Alice cards, and then kind of look to the message. Like this one says, a drink me labeled bottle. I don't need to get into the guidebook for this, again, my preference, but I could if I wanted to, and that was great. And then I'd look to the Seven of Pentacles and the Tower to look at that message of what do I need to know. And this really is one of those pairings that is more of that, what do I need to know right now? Like, I'm not looking at super deep personal growth work. I'm not looking at deep spiritual connection. I'm not trying to connect with any sort of deity or anything really grand. These are very mundane readings, but with that Alice in Wonderland vibe, with that steampunk energy, it just felt like it brought a little bit of fun, a little bit of unexpected to the readings. I did a lot of these where I would pull one oracle card and the 3 tarot. So I would have kind of conscious, subconscious, super conscious, that what do I know? What's hidden underneath? What do I need to be knowing? What do I need to become aware of? And it just worked so well for that in a general sense. It's one of my favorite pairings just to throw down anytime I felt like I just needed to take a break or needed a little bit of guidance. Again, kind of started this whole thing off with like that in the moment messages with the peculiar pathways and the birds. That had a more of a specific vibe in terms of working with, you know, I'm working through this project, I'm working on this thing, and I need some guidance and some clarity right this 5 minutes. This felt more of just like an everyday sort of, I just need some guidance and some clarity, like right this 5 minutes about just shit in general. And this just worked so great for that. It was so much fun. I love the energy of it. I love the vibe. And it just allowed me to bring a little bit of that fun chaos into my day. And it's one I will definitely be going back to again and again. So there we go. 8 of my favorite pairings from 2025. We'll definitely be using them moving into the next year, but I really enjoyed getting to know some of these new ones, bringing them into my practice, seeing where they fit, and then of course reconnecting with some old favorites. So much fun to work with them as pairs, with dice, with other casting systems. But again, kind of just that tarot oracle pairing is the foundation of my practice, and pretty much all my readings stem from that idea. So these were definitely fan favorites for the year. As always, you'll find links for everything I've shown here in the description box below. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today, and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.